Hi, I'm Parker Hall. I read for literary magazines, and I want to tell you what gets rejected. Welcome back if you're back. Like I said, I read for literary magazines. I also have a degree in English and creative writing and some post-grad stuff, and I love to teach beginners how to write. I want to talk about what submitting is, how to do it, cover letters, what it can do for your career, and what happens when it reaches my hands as a submission reader. I'm going to tell you the 4 main things I look for first when it comes to rejecting a piece. If you already know what submitting is, you've already submitted to places, you know what I'm talking about, then go to this timestamp for the 4 things I look for. But for the rest of you, what the hell am I talking about? So, small and large presses, people who publish, will accept submissions of either full collections, books, short stories, or poems. We're going to talk mostly about the individual pieces, but this kind of goes for all of it. And they will take those pieces and they will publish them in their magazine, which is either in print or online. Writers send in their work to these places to build up their writing resumes and to open up opportunities for themselves and to get their name out there. Building up your writing resume is really important. The more things you have listed there, the more likely you will be published again, because you're saying, hey, look, a lot of these people already like my work, so you will probably like my work too. It's already publishable. Depending on how many publications you have, you can apply for grants. And sometimes when you win contests, which you submit to the same way you submit to open submissions, they will have you actually read, sometimes on TV or on stage. This can be really great steps to getting an agent or to getting a full novel published as well. And this is also really great because you don't need an agent to send to magazines. You can do it from home with your laptop. So how do you submit? You go to the website of literary magazines and you hit their submissions tabs. They will usually have one right at the top. It's really easy to find. Some places will only take your work a couple of months out of the year. Some of them will accept all year round. But there's so many presses that take submissions that there's always someone taking your shit. So it doesn't matter if they're open or closed, just find the next one. You can also use websites like Submittable, not sponsored by the way. It finds places that are accepting submissions and puts them on a discovery page for you, and then you can just click on it and it'll take you to their submission tab on their website. And then it'll even keep track of the submissions and your replies from them. If you don't want to use a website like Submittable, totally fine. I would tell you to keep track of submissions yourself though. Pretty much the only downside to submitting to these things is that it costs money. Yes, there are some free submissions. Sometimes they only take a standard $3 reading fee, but sometimes they cost up to like $50, or I've seen some that go all the way up to $500. The more expensive ones are contests that have really big prize money at the end. When you go onto the submissions tab, there's rules for you to follow for how to submit. It'll tell you the font, the document format, how they want the cover letter written. It'll tell you how many poems you're allowed to send and how many words your short story is allowed to be. They'll also tell you if you need to include an author bio. If you do not follow these rules, they will not read your piece. We get so many submissions that it's not a problem tossing some out. So 2 terms that you're gonna see a lot that you're gonna need to know. One is simultaneous. Oh my god. How do you pronounce that?
Simultaneous. You know you could Google it, and Google has a little voice that'll say it for you?
I wanted you to tell me.
Okay.
I'm still filming.
I know.
The magazine will tell you if they accept these or not. It basically means, have you sent this piece to anyone other than this magazine? So the best way to send your pieces out, that we'll talk about more later, is just to send out a ton to as many places as possible. And that's what this word I apparently can't say is called. It is good etiquette and good form to let magazines know that they are not the only one considering your work. This will not make them not publish your piece thinking that other people might publish it, because so many people do it. It's just so common that no one gives a shit. Typically you do this because if your piece gets accepted somewhere while it's being considered somewhere else, you will then email that place it's being considered at and say, hey, thank you so much for your time, but my piece has been accepted, so please stop considering it here. If your piece gets accepted in multiple magazines or journals and you say yes to all of them, and you don't tell them that the other place is also publishing your work, you will be blacklisted from everywhere. It's a pretty huge deal, not just for etiquette and being like a good human being, but also for copyright law. When I was in university, my professor read us an article about someone who did this, who their piece was accepted by, I think 3 magazines at one time, which is kind of unheard of. And she allowed all 3 places to publish her work without saying anything, and then people realized, because magazines talk to each other. Everyone's friends with everyone. They wrote a whole article dragging her across the coals. No one will ever publish any of her work again. Like, this is a huge deal. And then they also shit on her. They were like, we don't even know why we wanted this piece. It actually sucks. Multiple submissions means that you are sending multiple submissions to the same place during one reading period. So say if something's open from April to October, you send in multiple submissions in those months. Typically, places do not accept that. They do not want to hear from you more than one reading period. It's pretty easy for the editor or reader to catch you if you do this, but it's forgivable. All we'll do is delete your second submission. We will not blacklist you or write articles about you for doing this. This one's pretty fine. When you get a piece published, you still own it. That's still yours. Most magazines will have like a copyright page that you can read if you want, but it typically works the same way with all of them. So they will get the copyright for like a second while they publish it, and then it goes back to you. It says it always reverts back to the author. And that's common because when you publish something in a literary magazine, you're still allowed to publish it in your own collection. But if something is in your own collection, you cannot send it to a literary magazine. They want only unpublished original work. It goes literary magazine, and then your own collection, and then an anthology. An anthology is just a work by many authors. I don't know if you can even see that. Everyone gets a couple of pieces in it. If you do have a piece in a literary magazine and you want to put it in your book of poetry or your book of short stories, that's fine. You can even edit it and have a different version in your own book. Fine. All you have to do is in the acknowledgements page of your book, you just acknowledge that it was first published in that magazine. You are not going to get published right away. Most likely it's not going to happen. You're going to have to face a lot of rejection. That's just how it goes. This is a numbers game and it's a long con. Amazing authors get rejected a lot. You cannot take it personally. You can get rejected from as simple as the editor having a bad lunch right before they read it. Maybe they did really like your piece, but they already picked a couple of people to publish. Like, you have to rewire your brain to not take rejection hard. If you are a writer or really any kind of artist and you take rejection personally or it really hits you hard, I don't think you're gonna last very long. I think you're gonna burn yourself out or mentally torture yourself. Rejection's not a big deal, you just have to keep going. There's no way to be an artist and get yourself out there without being rejected. The best advice I got from my professors at university was just to constantly have your pieces out there. As soon as you get it back, send it to another place. Have as many people considering your work as possible. Also, make sure your pieces are in great shape. We see a lot of pieces. We know writers. We are often writers ourselves, like I am. We can tell if you're an amateur. We can tell if you know what you're doing. So make sure your pieces are as good as they can get. First off, so you won't get rejected and you don't waste your money sending it out to a ton of places. But 2, because it will be on your name forever. You will be attached to that short story, that poem forever. And if it's shit, then it will follow you forever. Maybe a lot of people won't notice it because whatever, but it'll still be on your name and it could have been better. And I think that's just a point of pride. They don't have to be masterpieces, but it has to sound like a writer wrote it. So if you started writing last year, maybe give yourself a little bit more time before you start sending out your pieces. Another good thing that'll help your chances is if you read pieces published by the magazines and see which one of your pieces line up more with the type of work they publish. You can also find magazines that publish certain genres, like there are sci-fi literary magazines, horror magazines, romance magazines. Like, you can find ones that suit your work. So you found a magazine you liked, you sent your shit, and it ends up on my desk. What happens now? The first thing I look for is, can you follow instructions? We have rules posted. Did you follow them? I see a lot of work with no cover letter or with a clearly AI'd cover letter, and I will just toss it. I'm not looking at it. We asked you for a cover letter, please send us one. I also toss pieces that send me a short story that's 1,000 words longer than what we said on the website. Don't do that. Cover letters make my head spin. For real. Because they are so easy to write. They benefit you so much. That's where you get to show off and talk about all the cool things you've done. And people don't write them, or they write really, really shitty ones. If you've worked hard enough to get a few pieces of work published, then you should be listing them in the cover letter. I've gotten one that just said, please read. Dear editor, please read. Thanks. I got another one that just said, here you go. What do you think that's gonna do? So I wrote a template for you guys. It's really easy to follow. Screenshot it off of here. Another quick thing about cover letters, and I can't believe I have to say this, but don't be arrogant. Don't be an asshole. I can't tell you how many authors send in a cover letter and make it sound like they think they are God's gift to writing. They sound like I should be so grateful and crying on my knees that they decided to bestow me with their work. I have hundreds of submissions to read at any given time. I don't need that. And I don't read their submissions. I had one guy that sent me his cover letter that said, I think you guys are competent enough to read my work. No, I didn't read a sentence of it. All you have to say is, here's my piece. Here's how many words. I'm only sending it to you guys. It's original, it's unpublished. Here you go. Have a nice day. Thanks for your time and consideration. Also, unless you're sending a full collection to a contest or a submission where they want your full book, do not describe your piece in the cover letter. If you have a bunch of poems and you're like, these poems are about blah, blah, don't do that. Don't do it with your short story either. Just send in the title and how long it is. We're about to read it. We don't need you to explain it to us, and typically we don't want it. Second thing I look for, do you sound like a new writer? How comfortable are you in your writing voice? Does the story sound really clunky and awkward, or do you sound like someone who's written more than 2 things in their life? I'm talking about the basics. Can you tell me a story in an engaging way? Are the sentences written well? I'm talking about your style and how you put words on the page. Every writer has a style or a writing voice. You develop it over a long time of writing. It naturally happens. You can't really pick your voice. It just comes out. A lot of new beginners do not have a voice picked, and a lot of people who even have been writing for decades might not have a writing voice because they never push themselves. Writing voices typically mean you've moved from beginner to intermediate, and yes, you can write for 20 years and still be a beginner. It just depends on how much you push yourself, how much you teach yourself, how much you learn. So I try to notice if you have an interesting writing style. Having an interesting and settled and experienced writing style tells me that you know what you're doing and I can trust you with this story. No matter what the style is, I read the whole piece, but very rarely have I ever read a first paragraph that's super awkward and clunky and has a really bad writing voice and liked it by the end. It usually stays that way. A lot of times beginners will try to make their poems sound like how they think poems should sound. Same goes with short stories. I call it old poet voice. I talk about this in my reading Doki Doki literature poems video. They use it because they don't have their own voice yet, which is totally fine. They're a beginner. That's fine. We all start somewhere. I did it. They kind of do that while they try to find their own voice, as they will just try to sound like what poetry sounds like to them. And this isn't anything bad. I think people should just be aware that they might be doing this and then try to push themselves. And another good thing to move past this is to read more. Read more poetry. Read more authors. Read more authors that aren't doing what you do. Push what you know about poetry. How many cliches did you use? At any point, do you say anything original, or is it all cliches? I feel like everyone knows not to use cliches, but why do I keep seeing them? When I get a pile, I would say about 80% of it sounds the exact same to me. Sorry, it's not publishable. Publishable means that your work is worth someone's time and money. And a lot of those pieces in that 80% all use cliches, and a lot of them will use the same cliches as each other. And I just want to know why. Why do people do this? Oh, if you use 1 or 2 cliches, I will not reject your work. That is fine. We all sneak in 1 or 2 every once in a while. That's fine. If your work is a just cliches glued together, I can't accept that. That's not worth people's time and money. That's not publishable. The ones I see a lot are like things like something is icy hot, holes or arrows through the heart, feeling like you're a ghost, shattering like glass, poison in veins, being a monster, monster under the bed, darkness, roses, screaming and no one can hear you, being a flower, suffocating, trying to physically put a heart back together, drowning, faking a smile, saying the words "a piece of me is missing," panting, turning to stone, souls, how mysterious the concept of time is without actually commenting on what time means, eyes you can fall into, or eyes that have seen a lot, or eyes that are mysterious or clouded, eyes that have seen the horror of something, being directionless, and the whole poem is about walking down paths. Like Robert Frost already did that, you don't have to. The phrase, "I didn't know which way was up," and I haven't seen anyone do anything interesting with mirrors in a very long time. Mary Ruefle, in My Private Property, wrote a poem about putting salt and pepper into milkshakes. Don't give me mirrors and eyes. Don't get me started on the word pain. Oh, new writers need to forget that the word pain exists. I'm sorry. It gives me heartburn when I see it. I've seen really good poems that use the word pain. The word pain is not the problem. The problem is that a lot of new writers that I've seen will use it like 4 times in one stanza. They will use it like a crutch, and I think that you need to learn how to write poems without crutches and then start picking up things like the word pain. So if you have the word pain in one of your poems, figure out if you actually need it before you send it, maybe. Keep in mind that when you create art, you can do whatever you want. You can get weird with it. I love writing surrealism. I wrote a short story about a woman who gets a raccoon lost in her house because the raccoon was on her porch and asked for sugar. And she lost it in there, and she ended up turning into a raccoon, and her plants tried eating her, and she ended up sucking the life out of the raccoon, and like there was a fight to the death, and it was like, you can do whatever you want. How much do you rely on backstory? Do you have any scenes, conflict, dialogue? Are you showing or telling? There's a format of story I've never seen before, and then when I became a reader, I see it every day now. I don't know where people have got it from. I don't know where this came from. So it starts with an explosion or 2 people yelling or house falling down or the china breaking and it's interesting and I'm hooked. Like I want to know more, but I don't get more. Immediately it goes from that very interesting action, that perfect opening, and it goes back to the past for why that happened. And it's everything leading up to it. And it's all backstory. There's no scenes, there's no conflict, there's no dialogue. It's just someone telling the reader about their strained relationship with their mother or their divorce. And those are good things to write stories about, of course they are. But you have to write stories in interesting ways for them to be publishable. Don't give me a good appetizer and then for my entree, take a shit on my meal and then tell me the significance of it. And again, it's all telling. It's all saying, I don't like my mother because of this, instead of leading someone through a story, taking them on a journey through why they would feel this way. Showing, that's so important. People say show, don't tell, because that's where you get the emotional response of a story. If you tell someone, then they're not gonna feel a lot about it. This is a very boring way to show information, and if you're writing, you're putting this much work, you're taking hours to write this piece, or days or weeks or months or whatever to write this piece. Why would you want to do it in the most uninteresting way possible? You could do anything. Whenever I get these stories, I stop caring. And rarely ever by the end does it get back to the action. It usually just ends with the narrator going, but that's just my life, I guess. I don't get where this format came from. I don't get why people do it, because it doesn't create good stories. And yet stories that go back to the past, I've read some by experienced writers who handled the information really well. They went back to the past in very interesting ways and it was a good story. And they do it well because the actual story is about the narrator being a different person looking back and revealing more and more about their present self by how they describe the past and showing the reaction to it. And it's more about that than just listing events that kind of happened to them. Basic foundational knowledge of writing is, can you show me a scene? Can you show me dialogue? Can you show me conflict? No matter what kind of stories you write, no matter what kind of style you have, these are skills that you need to know. And once you have this foundational knowledge, you can kind of do whatever you want and you can trust yourself and you'll have more experience. Also, side note, I didn't realize I would get so many kung fu fighting stories, and if you write those, please send me more. Like, I love them so much. I always have so much fun reading the kung fu stories. I've only gotten like 4, but that's way more than I thought I would. So you guys are cool. Whoever wrote the kung fu stories that I get, or any other reader gets, you guys are cool. Invest in learning how to show and not tell. Invest in learning how to create conflict. Invest in learning how to present your information in interesting ways. Okay, 2 more extra things I just want to add on here. Something that I see a lot is that in poetry and short stories, I think it's a little bit worse to do in short stories, but I think that's a matter of opinion. That's an opinion thing, whatever. They will have a line that's just by itself for emphasis. Like, there's the paragraph and then 1 extra line. I see a lot of this at the end of a short story. They typically say things like, but it was all a dream, or, but was that even real? And, but I guess that's just my life, right? I've talked to a few writers and other readers about this, and I think the consensus with the people I've talked to is that having these lines by themselves are fine sometimes. No one should say that you shouldn't outright do it. It's better to do it for humor than for making something dramatic and sad, but the consensus is don't do this too much. Learn how to be dramatic without putting the line by itself, because it often looks cheesy and it is often pandering and pretentious. These lines also feel patronizing. The reader can understand what you were trying to say from that big paragraph or from the whole story. You don't need that extra line. Think of it like you're on the sidewalk and you're watching across the street and you see 2 people, like, they were angry at each other, now they're hugging, and they say, I'm sorry to each other. Right? That's a touching scene. Oh, cool. And then now picture a dude walking up to you and going, they have forgiven each other. It's like, yeah, no shit. What are you telling me that for? I can see it. Now you're angry. Now you're not touched by that scene anymore. Now you're pissed that someone had to tell you something, like you're an idiot. Like, yeah, I know. I can see it. Explaining something that's already clear takes away all the emotional impact you could have gotten from that scene. It'll instantly make the reader roll their eyes. Like, yeah, I know. So I just want to challenge you guys that if you know you have a piece that has a line that's by itself, if you want to keep it, that's up to you. But I do challenge you to figure out a different way to convey what you want, or see how it reads with it taken out. And rethinking what you do is a really good exercise for anything, even if it's a piece you really like. It helps you push yourself. When we write, we do a lot of things automatically because we've done them so much. And rethinking what you do can break you out of a rut or a cycle and help you push yourself. Last thing, opening lines. I love opening line. It's a really great opportunity to hook the reader and just to say something surprising. You kind of have free reign to do whatever you want. There's no words that come before it. A boring first line to me isn't like a deal breaker. I'll still accept your piece. Like, it's fine. It's just kind of disappointing. Like, you could have done something more there. I hope this helped. I just wanted to talk about a couple of things you guys could do to improve your writing pretty quickly and how to get it out there. This is my channel where I talk about writing and sometimes I analyze stuff. So my boyfriend that you saw earlier, he makes videos about characters who aren't in Smash, if they were and what that would look like, their movesets and shit, and a bunch of Pokemon stuff that I don't really understand, but okay.